We've heard a lot today about the relationship between sales, customer success. We've heard from customers in terms of how they like to deal or do not like to deal with their customers. Maybe a good place to start would be, at what point should a company start thinking about customer success? And when is it time to be thinking about making that first hire? And maybe since you may have just gone through it, I'd love to get your opinion.
So I think the easiest way to answer that question is when we were building Conversant. So we kind of sat down and around a table, the three founders, in June of 2012, and we put together a list. So fortunately, we had just built a previous company from 1 million to 60 million in 2 years. So we had an amazing group of folks that we wanted, that we knew we wanted to bring over. And literally on the list, there were 3 people, and Rachel was one of them. And I think we just celebrated your 3rd anniversary. So she was one of the first people that we brought on because we knew that, when you build a company at the scale that we were trying to build it, I actually think that the best customer success person out there is actually Maya Angelou. And the reason that I think that is we only have one quote. We're not like a big quote company. We don't have a lot of, we don't have any of the posters on the wall with the golf courses and stuff. But the one quote that we have on the wall, and it's in huge letters, and literally you can see it from anywhere in the office, is it's not what you say, it's not what you do, but it's how you make them feel that matters. And she was an extraordinary woman, and she put that on the wall. And when you build a software company, especially an enterprise class software company, you know that the software is not going to work on the first big major implementation, and probably not going to work really well in the second, third, and fourth. And what's interesting is, of those first group of customers that we have, they are extraordinary references for us. In Q3, we actually reported 115% effective retention rate. We only had one customer leave out of 400, and they went bankrupt. So they had to leave. They were gone. And so I think all of that comes back to the decision we made to hire Rachel and have her be there from the very beginning. There's many broken things that she had to clean up as we transitioned things from sales to implementation, et cetera. But what she never had to fix was the fact that the DNA of loving our customer and treating our customer with a huge amount of respect and remembering Maya Angelou's quote that it's how they feel that matters the most, she never had to fix that. So I would say if one of your first 4 or 5 hires is not a customer success person, you're probably going to regret that.
So Kevin, you've obviously today in a big organization, but you've done a number of startups. What has been your opinion?
Yeah, I agree very much. I've been, since '99, we called it ASP, then we called it on demand, then we called it SaaS, now we call it cloud, right? Gartner and Forrester need to make money, so we change the label every 3 or 4 months, or 3 or 4 years, right? So that the researchers can make more money, but it's been the same stuff. It's been a on-premise hosted, right, delivery for technology, and I've been involved from pre-revenue, literally pre-alpha product on the one end all the way to almost $1 billion business, now, and verbatim, whether you're very small, mid-size, you can't start early enough. The only caveat that I would put to that is, sometimes super early, if you're going to spend 18 months doing nothing but building tech, right, and you're not even going to put it in front of a customer until, month 24, maybe you don't burn that cash for 18 months, but the second you're getting ready to even put an alpha or a beta client on that, and you need that lens around implementation, onboarding, measurement, adoption, utilization, customer success, et cetera, you make that one of the first field hires, if not the first field hire in the entire organization, and that way it's in your DNA and you never forget. So I couldn't agree with your input more.
And what was interesting is we made a decision, and it was probably, and Rachel was involved in the decision making. It was probably not intentional, but looking back on it, it was a really wise decision. Is Rachel actually managed the launch of the company. So we went live in January of 13, had a product dish, but certainly put the brand out, et cetera. And so she was responsible for, at that point, we called it kind of customer love, but she actually took the brand, the company, the product, and was responsible for bringing together the different groups at the time, a couple of people together and making sure that we had a clear plan around that. So, customer success, which we weren't even using that term at the time, was literally there at the birth.
And not that this ever happens, but for those of you that are small and early, and not that this ever happens, but if you have venture capitalists arguing with you about whether it's worth the burn rate, not that ever happens, make sure your conviction on that. One successful deployment of Philip Morris that's referenceable is worth 20 field sales reps, at least, if not 50 sales reps in the first 2 years of the firm is initial success in your first 10 customers that are referenceable, happy, and will go sell it to the next 200. They're your best sales team, and that only happens if Rachel is keeping them wildly happy. So if you get caught in that discussion around economics, call me. Okay? It's an easy discussion you should have.
Jackie, how do you advise your clients?
So one of the things I was going to share is back in the day, I always say back in the day, because it was all on-prem back in the day. People thought, nobody had customer success back in the day. They actually did, but here was the problem. It took them until they got to closer to 80 to 100 million before they really figured out that they needed focus on the customers. So even though they didn't have renewals, they still had maintenance, and they took on big accounts, and then they would put a number on that account. So I'll give you an example. Chevron, you got to get 10 million out of them this year. American Express, you got to get 15 million out of them. They had to have an ability to have a team focused on ensuring that customer success from division to division, group to go wall to wall to get to those big numbers in the enterprise space. They called it strategic account management. It still was customer success. It just was labeled differently back then. And so my focus with my clients today, Faster and Growing, is to that point. Get it in early. Most of them were like, no, we're not ready. At Task's average ASP was $5K. We were at 8 million. They were already at like 800 customers. So the minute I was in there, I built that from the ground up, right along with the whole services model. So the earlier you do it, the better you figure out that roadmap, and the better that team can grow up and get to the end game for each of your customers much, much quicker. And then you can expand quicker, and you can basically go wall to wall a lot faster in your accounts, in your base. So that annual growth base can actually go at a higher trajectory.
So Jackie, you've been involved with a number of companies, both inside and as a consultant, and I think for the three of you, would love to hear what are some of the attributes that you think about, not only as you're hiring a customer success executive, but also as the company scales, how does that change?
I'll start with that one. One of the things, I actually interview these candidates now for a lot of my clients because they're running the same problem. What do I look for? The truth is, you're never going to find somebody that probably has everything you're looking for. So for your company, you really have to understand what are the most important things. But the real skill set you're looking for is somebody who can think strategically, can basically look at your market and really come up with a strategy. This person's real key role is being a strategist for the customer. So it means, what is the roadmap by market segment? What should that strategy be? Because once you know what the end game is by each of those target markets, you can build what your marketing, your sales, your services programs, all the elements that you need to take them from phase 1 to 2 to 3. How do you get them so entrenched that it isn't just because you're SaaS and you have your data, but it's because you transformed my company. You have made such an impact that you couldn't rip it out of my cold, dead hands. That's how you want them to think, where they're telling everybody about who you are and what you are because you've had such a tremendous impact on their business. This person in this role needs to think that way because it's always going to change. The market's going to change. Your competitors are going to change. And they can't put their feet in a bucket of cement and go, built it, I'm done. And so that's really some of the things I found that are really good for that role.
I think when you're large and what you do, and again, this is business dependent, but in our world, for instance, you've got the tech support function, you've got implementation and onboarding function, you've got good old-fashioned customer service, you've got all the kind of technical and strategic advisory stuff, you've got you've got the analytics involved with benchmarking and quarterly business reviews. You've got 7 or 8 different things, all that roll into a CSS quarterback, right? So at a more mature phase with larger relationships, we kind of hire almost from like the McKinseys or the Accentures, the Deloitte's, people that are good at relationship management, program management, facet, relationship that can deal with 8 different people on my side and 18 different people on the client side, plus a systems integrator, plus an agency, plus you name it, right? So that ability to kind of lead a highly fragmented, that all has to come together around key objectives. And then when you're small and you can't afford all those, right? When you're early, you're a $20 million company, you kind of look for a generalist, right? It's about nimbleness, flexibility, adaptability, thinking on your feet, because those people are going to have to wear all 9 of those hats this month, depending on the phone call they get today. And they have 9 different job descriptions. So when you can afford to specialize, you specialize and put CSS on top that can ring, lead, or orchestrate. Right, and you can afford to go get that person below. You kind of need to hire that Draymond Green that can play all 5 positions on the floor, because that person's going to get called on to play all 5 positions depending on what the day is and what the opponent is.
Yeah, I would say, when I look across our executive team, so I'll answer it in a real practical way. The skill set that I know Rachel has that's so important is that everybody looks at customer success as something that helps them do their job. So the sales team, was very easy. 28% of our revenue this quarter was from our existing customer base. So what Rachel and the team have turned into is the single best lead that the sales team has. So there's a very direct, tangible thing. I would say on the product side is that our product team, our engineering team, what CS has turned into is also the best source of information that they get. So that ability to be able to effectively communicate with type A extroverts and be able to effectively communicate with introverts and engineers, to be able to do both of those things at the same time and become just an automatic value add inside the organization, where our chief product officer and our head of sales, who are her peers, just without Rachel they couldn't do their jobs. And I think so. If I was looking, never let me look, please. If I was looking, I would say that it has to be somebody that is an equal in the organization, and that certainly needs to be in the org chart. If it doesn't report to the CEO, then you do not believe in customer success. Hard stop. Second of all, I think that it's a very nuanced political role that they have to be able to slip into, to be able to show that value to they're the bridge between sales and the engineers, right? And if you think about those personalities, you think about what what frustrates them, what excites them, they're so fundamentally different. And to be able to bridge that gap takes a curious, intelligent, politically savvy person.
At JM, we do a fair amount of customer success searches, and one of the things that we have found, and I think it was kind of the impetus of putting this event together, is how does a customer success organization work in various companies, and which also then relates to what type of person do you need to hire. And some of the tug of war that we've seen is, does the head of customer success have revenue responsibility? Or does that purely go over to the sales organization? So revenue being defined as either upsell or contract renewal. So I guess I have 2 questions. One is, how do you guys feel about that in terms of, should the customer success organization have revenue responsibility? And then secondly, if they do or if they don't, how does that impact the attributes that you would look for in the head of that organization?
Yeah, I'll jump on that first. So, they should absolutely positively have a revenue goal.
Why?
Pardon me?
Why?
Why? Because I think that, so let's go, so there were, I think, Rami, you had the 3 things up here that you ranked them, and one was revenue, one was churn, upsell, and customer satisfaction. What I thought of when I saw that was that they were actually out of order. Customer satisfaction should come first, and then churn and upsell should become second, because if you have customer satisfaction and you have a good product, then you're going to get the others. And so I think the reason that they should carry a quota is it will change the relationship that you have with the customer. So we just instituted this last quarter, was the first quarter where we had a specific number. They absolutely crushed their number, and without that number, we wouldn't have hit our number. So A, I'm a believer because it worked. And B, I think that so one of the things that we've done in our organization is we have very clear territory alignment between sales and customer success. So those are very tight teams. So there's, and thinking a little bit about baseball with Bill here, is that what we have to do as executives is, especially at the stage company we're in, is a lot of this is kind of managing those personalities. So we want to make sure that if those territories are aligned, then customer success will be in the sales engagement because the salesperson knows that it's going to make it easier to close that deal, because when the customer success person is on the call, it just makes us sound more intelligent, right? We can talk about the challenges, not just all the good things. Here's what you have to think about in your implementation. If you put that quota on it, the other thing it does is it makes it, this is a subconscious thing that happens. So if you think about land and expand, if the easiest thing to do to sign a customer is to sell a module, which we found, then if you need to have that quota on the customer success team, because otherwise you're going to be stuck with that smaller ACV, and then you're going to be trying to sell larger platform deals, which is longer sales cycle time, right? It's all kind of a big circle. So I think not having a quota is a mistake, and I think that that then you need to have that territory alignment. I mean, those are practical things that we've just seen.
And I'm just going to kind of take you to my experience with Workfront when I joined them, and they were very young. So this is going to combine both. I ended up with 80% of the revenue of the company, owning it as the SVP of Customer Experience or Chief Customer Officer. And that evolved from the very beginning over time. But I started out owning services revenue. Then when I built the customer success team, I took on the renewals. But here's why that's really important. It's important because you're also helping your team to understand this is our contribution to the company's success. This is how we're helping the company be successful. And you get your team behind that and you're being transparent with that information. You get a lot of buy-in, you get a lot of ideas, you get a lot of innovation from the ground up because they're all just as vested as you are. And then it doesn't sound like you're about the numbers. You're about the customer success. And here is the fruit of all of our labor. And these are all the things that we're helping to drive in the company. So that's kind of the why behind why I think that's important. But the role I was going to share, when I did start, you have to remember I went from this huge job where I had 300 people underneath me to a tiny little job in a tiny little company where I started with 7 people. And we built it up. I actually, just so you want to know all the hats I had to wear, I had to build the methodology for the consulting team. I had to build the templates. I had to write the SOWs. I had to write all the contracts. I had to help sales understand how to bring services in early and often and set the position. I had to go write an entire customer support policy, what the SLAs were. I had to put all the technology in to track what our customers were doing, the engagements, all the adoption, the usage, on and on and on. I actually don't even think I played the executive true role until probably my last year there before I left. Everything else, I was very much in the trenches with my team, helping to build them with the ground up and mentoring these people into their roles and into their leadership roles. So for those of you who are trying to figure out who that is, it can wear a lot of hats, but I would say passionate about customer success and has a strong services consultative type of background is really helpful because they will have to get into the trenches.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead, whether it's very small or very big, customer success should own revenue. So, and the way we've done it, both in the startups I've run as well as the business I'm running now, revenue is the actual revenue. All right, bookings, sales owns bookings, right? Customer success owns revenue. And as a SaaS business gets bigger and bigger, guess which lever actually drives valuation? It's the revenue. It's not the bookings, right? You get to a business our size or Salesforce's size, and new bookings for a quarter is almost meaningless. It has to do with how you're doing on revenue, churn reduction, et cetera. So, and you kind of, how you compensate is kind of how you believe, right? So we have CSS's primary comp metric is the actual renewal. They do have a comp component on expansion, which means if their sales partners that they're aligned with on the territories do in fact drive new bookings out of the install base, they have an incentive so that behavior and compensation is aligned between sales and CSS. And those are 2/3 of it, and then 1/3 of it's MBO around customer success and advocacy, but 2/3 of the comp plan is either on revenue that they own directly and sales doesn't, or bookings influence in partnership with sales, which they can actually co-own. So yeah, they need to influence bookings, and they need to own revenue, in our opinion.
And then what type of person do you look for if you're going to hire a head of customer success? Again, what are some of the attributes? Because given the number of things that this person has to do, given that they're both in account management and they're in revenue, and sometimes those two personalities don't go together, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I still kind of go back to the comments here. It's almost like you're hiring a general manager or COO. because they've got to be able to influence product and development. They've got to be able to manage support. They've got to be able to deal with customer and partner and agency relationships. They've got to manage a number. They've got to manage process. They've got to manage change. They've got to, I mean, they literally have to manage everything. So that nimble, broad, general management mentality that can kind of span across all the various hats that CSS wears and all the metrics that we want to hang on them is really the key attribute. Otherwise, and then they can have teams that are very, very specialized underneath them. But the CSS, if they're the quarterback, they kind of need to be that quarterback or that business owner, not a job description owner.
You mentioned compensation, which obviously compensation drives behavior. How do you two think about incentive compensation as it relates to the leader of the organization, not necessarily the people below them?
Our leadership did have revenue was part of the comp, but customer success metrics were the other half of the comp. So it was half of the revenue goals, and the other half were specific customer success metrics, usually around, we created what we called an indispensability factor that was an algorithm of adoption, usage, value, and hitting what we called key success factors that customer specified. So it is a lot of data collection. We did build that. But what was great is once we had that database, we were actually able to build customer dashboards, and the entire company could pull up a customer, and you had an entire dashboard on that customer with all those same metrics. So they could monitor how that customer was progressing as their metrics week to week throughout the quarter. They could see the aggregate as well as individual, as well as maybe just their own territory or their own named list of accounts. So if you build that kind of metrics behind them, it actually drives all the right behavior instead of being so heavy one way or the other. So we kind of, my philosophy to my team was we have to own up to a revenue number, right? We're responsible to the board and our investors. But the bottom line is, here's what I've learned in 20 years in tech. Take care of the customer, numbers follow. Always happens.
Patrick?
Yeah, on that one, I would say we're just in the process of building that right now. So I'm doing more listening than speaking on that one.
That's why we're here. Great. Thank you very much.